I think we should just jump in and have our presentations get rolling. So with that, let's move to Jennifer. We are thrilled to have you here. And could you introduce yourself? That would be great. Oh, you're on mute. There you go.
I'm thrilled to be here also. Thank you very much for the invitation. I'm going to talk today about the work my colleagues and I have been doing evaluating the Stevens Initiative. As some of you might be aware, the Stevens Initiative is an international public-private partnership designed to support people-to-people exchanges between youth in the U.S. and youth in the Middle East and North Africa. It's a tribute to the legacy of Ambassador Chris Stevens, who devoted his life to building bridges between cultures. The initiative provides competitive grants to organizations that are implementing virtual exchanges. There have been 3 cohorts of awardees so far, and these include organizations that have implemented virtual exchange for young people in the middle grade, secondary school, and post-secondary. In addition to providing these grants, the initiative undertakes activities to support the maturing and growth of the field of virtual exchange. Some examples of their field building work include developing and disseminating various resources. They have a great website with a lot of different resources. And we'll show you some specific links related to evaluation in a moment. They also convene groups of stakeholders, host webinars, a lot of interesting work. Next slide, please. So, and I'll say just a few things about my organization before I turn to the approach we're taking with the evaluation. RTI is a nonprofit multidisciplinary research organization. We have expertise in the social sciences, engineering, international development, other fields. And what unites this diverse work is our common mission to improve the human condition through research and evaluation. We have offices across the U.S. and internationally. The team that works on this project is from the Washington, D.C. area, and then Berkeley, California, and Portland, Oregon. Next slide, please. We've been the independent evaluator for the initiative since 2016. I'll share some general points about how we have been approaching the evaluation. Then I'll describe our methods, and then I'll show some specific results from one of the methods from surveys of participants. In terms of our approach, we are taking a developmental evaluation approach. Traditional evaluation approaches typically provide summative information to external funders. Developmental evaluation allows for real-time feedback. One of our highest priorities is supporting learning and continuous improvement for the awardees and the initiative. And I'll mention that it's not a static evaluation. We've evolved in our methods and measures, and we expect to continue making adjustments as we move forward, as we continue to learn alongside our partners. We are committed to engaging critical stakeholders throughout the evaluation process. We want to ensure that awardees and other partners can understand and use the data that are being collected. And we want to leverage local knowledge and experiences to inform the research. One way we do this is through an evaluation working group, which meets quarterly and is comprised of representatives from each awardee organization, from the Stevens Initiative, from their funders, and it's enabled us to incorporate the sometimes diverse perspectives of the various stakeholders, such as identifying which key global competencies are of interest to the initiative, because there are so many different implementing organizations serving different levels of students and with different content focus. The evaluation work group has also been a venue for us to share evaluation results and for awardees to help us interpret them, and for awardees to share effective practices, both in terms of conducting virtual exchanges and in evaluating their programs. Having a culturally competent evaluation is a value and concern we have for all of our projects, and it's particularly important in this project because it spans countries and cultures. We have had team members who have lived and done research in the MENA region, and we ask and rely on our partners to help us identify blind spots we might have. One example is when we did site visits for Morocco, we were supported by a Moroccan translator, and he and others had told us that the Moroccan youth may not be as comfortable as US students tend to be in providing critical or negative feedback about a program. So he and we made an extra effort to clarify how important their candid responses were, that critical feedback is important to hear if they had it to help improve the program for future students. One of the main goals of the program is to measure outcomes for youth participants of virtual exchange. And a category of outcomes we're examining are global competencies, which I'll show the list of global competencies that we're measuring in just a moment. In addition to measures of student outcomes, we've been helping the initiative to track indicators related to the growth of the field of virtual exchange and also metrics related to the reach of the initiative. Next slide, please. I'll briefly describe the various methods and then I'll dive deeper into surveys. So we have surveys of youth participants. They take the surveys as they're starting and ending the program. We've done site visits in the US and the MENA region where we do a number of things that you see listed on this slide. With the help of awardees, we collect participant demographic data and information about the institutions they attend. Over the years, we've conducted key informant interviews with stakeholders in the field, funders, to better understand the work of the Stevens Initiative in building and supporting the field more broadly. And more recently, we've analyzed Twitter data, the Institute's website metrics, webinar attendance, virtual exchange conference presentations, among other indicators to examine whether and how the field has grown. Next slide, please. So now that I've described our general approach and listed our methods, I'm going to share some results from participant surveys that speak to participant outcomes. Next slide, please. So we went through and continue to go through an iterative collaborative process with the Stevens Initiative, their funders, and awardees to identify a set of global competencies that the groups feel are most universal to the virtual exchange programs, irrespective of the program's substantive content, format, targeted participant populations. And we looked to see whether there were existing scales that could be used or modified for this evaluation. And we've arrived for now at these global competencies. So knowledge of the other, a knowledge about the culture and lives of youth peers in another country, perspective taking, the ability to understand another's point of view, empathy, the ability to adopt and share feelings of others, cross-cultural communication, the ability to communicate effectively with individuals from other cultures, cross-cultural collaboration, the ability to work productively and collaboratively with individuals from other cultures, self-other overlaps, feelings of commonality with people from other countries, and feelings thermometer, feelings of warmth towards people from other countries. Programs had some choice about which dimensions to include in their surveys. If we had everybody include all of these, it would be a really long survey, so we gave some choice. So for example, programs could decide to ask about perspective taking or empathy or cross-cultural communication or cross-cultural collaboration. And programs did include other survey scales and items on their surveys that were particularly interest of them. Some of the dimensions, each of these we asked at the beginning of programs but at the end. Some of them we also asked retrospectively. So for this, on the post-program surveys, participants are asked to think back before you started the program and assess themselves on those skills and behaviors as they think back to how they were. So the post-program survey, they'll answer how they are now on these skills and behaviors, and then think back to before you started the program. The benefit of retrospective questions is that it can eliminate response shift bias. So when the knowledge or skills the participants acquire through participating in the program leads them to interpret the questions differently, and they sort of have more experience to evaluate how they were before they joined the program. Next slide, please. You'll see in a moment, these are survey results from fall 2019. The arrows indicate a notable change and one that's statistically significant. We relied on something called effect sizes to quantify the difference between the pre and post-program survey items. And an effect size of 0.20 is a commonly used threshold for identifying at least a small change. So we've tried to simplify this table here just by showing you the direction of changes that are, and whether they are at the 0.20 effect size level or not. And you can see from this slide across many of the global competency dimensions, we did observe increases for both MENA and US students on these global competencies. For some of the dimensions, the change was only observed when we compared participants' retrospective responses on their end of program survey to their current end of program assessment of themselves. This was the case for perspective taking. Next slide, please.
Can I ask a question? And actually, there's a question in the chat too. Is this just above the students' perspective, or is this also the faculty, the instructors? I'm sorry, maybe you said this, but I didn't catch that.
No, thank you for that clarification. I didn't. This is the students' report of themselves, so their own answers to a set of survey items.
And the question in the chat, is this across all of Stevens Initiative awardee programs?
Yeah, yes, another good question. So this is for fall 2019 when we had surveys for the awardees that were active at that time, which was about 5 programs. So this is aggregating the results across those 5 programs, and this is what we found. We also report back to individual programs about their particular growth, but this is the aggregated set of data.
And then, so are you evaluating the programs or the students or the faculty, or is it just evaluating the students at this time, or are you also sort of evaluating the programs themselves?
Well, we're evaluating the programs in the sense of the experiences in the programs, are they associated with these changes? So we do qualitative through site visits and observations. We look for promising practices and those. So that's maybe that speaks more to evaluating the program. But this is intended to look at what are the outcomes for youth who participate in the program. So that's one dimension of evaluating the program. We have not evaluated the facilitators or teachers. We do collect qualitative data from them for their perspective of what young people are gaining. And for the most part, the qualitative data really sort of triangulates with and supports these quantitative survey results. We don't hear drastically different things through our qualitative information from facilitators and teachers about the changes of their students with what we see in the surveys that the students fill out themselves.
Thank you. Sorry to interrupt.
No problem. No, thank you for flagging clarifying questions. Okay, so I thought we'd give you a deeper sense of one of the common measures and show you here how it's measured. So this is the self-other overlap measure, and it's designed to assess feelings of commonality with another country or culture. So participants are shown this diagram on their survey and asked to choose the picture that most closely represents the participants' relationship with people from their partner country. So item A would be the least degree of commonality, while item G would be the most. And they're asked this at the pre-program survey and at the post-program survey. So from pre-program to post, there were statistically significant increases in the level of self-other overlap reported by young people in the US and young people in the Middle East and North Africa. And the effect sizes were above 0.20. You can see here that the effect sizes were larger for US participants, and that's because the US participants started with lower levels of self-other overlap at the beginning of programs and then increased more. Could you please advance the slide? I don't have time today to describe the implementation challenges and promising practices and ways to avoid these challenges that we observed and heard about through our qualitative data collection. But I did want to point you to this Learning and Impact Report, which Stevens Initiative released and summarizes the qualitative findings from our site visits. So I think it's a really helpful resource. Next slide, please. And also wanted to point you to the evaluation toolkit that Stevens Initiative has published. And it's based on the approach and materials that we developed for the evaluation. It describes evaluation practices you can consider for virtual exchange programs. There are two sets of appendices. One contains the common survey scales, and the other are protocols for qualitative data collection, the interviews, focus groups, observation protocols. Some of the common survey scales have recently been slightly revised, and they are being updated in the appendix in the next few days. So I suggest you wait a week or so before downloading those. And really excited to talk to folks in breakout rooms and happy to answer any more questions at this point.
I don't see any questions in the chat. I have one. At one of the early slides you showed, I just wanted to go back to that for a second. That one, this. So one of the evaluation methods was social media and website visits. How is that happening? How does that work?
Yeah, sure. So we were looking from 2015 to 2019. So Stevens Initiative were able to share like metrics of how many visitors they had. So we were able to see, do we see a growth in visitors? For social media, we analyzed Twitter data to see if there was a growth in the use of the term virtual exchange or the hashtag virtual exchange or a number of search criteria we used. And we were looking to see if there were changes in that. Same thing with conference presentations. So from 2015 to 2019, we looked at I think about 21 conferences and looked through their agendas and coded whether there were presentations about virtual exchange. And we had a few different search terms so that we weren't just narrowly looking at that specific term. Did we see a growth in conference presentations over those years?
What's next on what are you going to focus on in terms of your research now that you've got sort of like the ground floor?
Yeah, good question. So we have another group of awardees we're working with, so to see if we continue to see the same sorts of outcomes. And two of them are doing a more rigorous evaluation that includes comparison groups through something called quasi-experimental design. So that'll allow for a clear indication of impact because there'll be comparison data.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. We will move on to the next.